welcome to the tutorial for exercise 2. The first thing you need to do is create a new document. What you see on my screen is my finished version of exercise 2, and I'm going to be recreating something like it for this tutorial. Hit File, New Document. Now, some of you may have already figured out that you have some options in this new document window that will affect how the document looks when it opens. And there are some things that we can do to make things easier right here in this window before proceeding to the document itself. For one thing, you can change the units to inches right here. And there is this option called Facing Pages. For some of you, it was checked when you created your document, and it shouldn't have been for exercise 1. But we do want it to be checked for this particular exercise. So if it is checked, leave it. If not, make sure that it's checked. You want to leave your orientation to be portrait, and we're going to change the start number for the page to 2. Yours probably says 1 as a default, but make it 2. And you can scroll down. Margins are up to you. This is going to be a design choice. I usually put mine at 1/2 inch. So I'm going to go ahead and look at everything. Everything seems right. I do want 2 pages. I want them to be facing. They're 8.5 by 11, portrait orientation, and I want the start number page to be on 2. The reason I want the start number page to be on 2, if you look at it, if you don't select that, it's going to start with a page on the right-hand side and then give you a second page on the left-hand side. And that's the problem that you're going to run into if you don't have that start page on 2. This is how it should look. It's basically the format of a magazine spread. Now, if you go into your Pages window, and again, if that's not already open, you can go to Window, Pages, or Command F12, and that will open. You'll notice that there is something called a master spread. Now there can be A masters and B masters. That's so that you can create different rules for your document that it can apply to different spreads throughout. We're not going to deal with anything with the B masters, but the A masters are going to be important to us. So go ahead and click on the page of the master. You notice I've clicked on this left-hand side. So basically what's happened in my document is it's showing me a page that looks exactly like my document pages, but what I am looking at is what's called the master page. Now whatever I do to the master is going to occur to every left-hand sided page throughout my document. So if you notice something happening on the left-sided pages that you don't mean to happen repeatedly, it's probably because it's on your master pages. But what I want to create on my master page is a page number, and I do want that to occur on every document. So I'm going to open a text box, a text frame right here. So now I need to put the page number in here. Now page numbers are something that InDesign can create for you automatically. I'm teaching you this in case you ever need to create a document that is, say, 50 pages. You don't want to go through your entire document and type in the page numbers individually. Say you needed to change something in the document. You wouldn't want to have to rearrange all those numbers, or worse, go back in and manually change all the numbers. So there's this handy little tool. If you go into the Type window, and then you scroll down, you say Insert Special Character, Markers, Current Page Number. And there is a shortcut for this. It's a little long, 4 different keystrokes, but you can just select Current Page Number. And if you scroll in, what you'll see is that it has the letter A. Now that A is a stand-in for what the number would actually be, okay? Now I'm just going to shrink the size of this. Actually, I'm going to bring it all the way to the corner. And I'm going to justify that text. Make it a little smaller because I want it to land right on the corner of those margins that I know exactly where it is. Okay, now I'm going to copy that text box, and I'm going to make sure I'm not just going to scroll over to the right. I'm going to select the right-hand side of the page in my master spreads, because I could scroll over to the right and I could create something, but it would still apply to the left page. It would just think that it's hanging really far to the right in the document. So I want to make sure the right-hand side is selected. Now I'm going to paste that page number, and I'm going to put it in this corner. Now since this is on the right side, I'm going to left justify the text, and now they are in the same spots but in mirror image to each other. Okay, now remember, this is the master spread, so if I go back to the actual document pages and you scroll in, it's not going to say A, it's going to say 2 and 3, because it is completing those numbers automatically. Now the reason that it says 2 is because the first page of a document is always going to be on the right. So InDesign is assuming that whatever your first page is, you've either created it in a different document or that maybe it's going to be above this particular page. But since it starts with the left page, it's going to make that an even number. Now we could manually change it so that the left side is number 1, but you don't need to know how to do that, so we're not going to be concerned about it. Okay, so if you look at the prompt for exercise 2, you've completed 2 things already. You have master spreads, which are always created automatically in the document. It's not something that you need to actually create, but we are using them. We have facing pages, and we have page numbers. All right, now grid systems and guides, that's another thing that we need to do. If I jump back over here to my news article in magazine format, if I switch the view real quick, this is what it would look like. Okay, so lots of pretty text, lots of pretty images, and remember, you can switch between the views. So the screen mode, I told you guys last time, I like to design in preview because all the lines and bells and whistles get in my way. But if you switch to normal, which you can do really quickly by just hitting the W key, switching back and forth, that is showing me all of these extra lines. Now, these lines are housed in my master spread, and these lines are called guides, okay? The underlying structure for these guides is called a grid system, and you're going to learn about that at length in the handouts, particularly the handout on grid theory. Some really excellent information there. But you're going to have to determine for yourself what exactly you want your grid system to look like. Okay, now the point of a grid system is to organize the information within the magazine article or the poster or the artist book or whatever you're designing. So if you look at what I've done, I have lined all of my information up with these different guides. And basically, it's a good way to think about it is like the framework for a house. First, you get all of the different wall frames built, and then the content or the actual wall itself, the drywall, the insulation, etc., goes into that framework. Okay, so it's up to you what that framework looks like, and it's really important that you decide what that framework looks like before you start inputting content. So I knew that I wanted to have a large area for images, so I left some bigger spaces up here at the top, and I left some smaller, more compacted spaces in the bottom half of this spread. Now, these lines don't mean that, oh, I can only put something in this itty bitty square. No, I could have content and I could fill this grid in any number of ways. I'm just going to use a square as a placeholder, but this square or this rectangle could be filled with text. It could be filled with imagery. I'm just going to pull that opacity down a little bit so that you can see. Okay, so I could fill this any way that I wanted. I could fill it like that, or I could fill it like this. Okay, imagine a picture's here and a text box is here. Or imagine a picture's here and the text box goes all the way down here. Or a picture is long like this. And maybe that's what the left side looks like. But maybe I come over here and my picture is really long, like this. And then I have a text box that may be short, like this. Okay, so you see my point. Like, this is basically a framework, but you can fill it in any way that you like, so long as your content adheres to the rules, quote unquote, of these guides. Okay? All right, so now let's talk about how to actually make these guides. Let me jump back over here. Again, you want to house them in your master spreads, so make sure that those are selected. The easiest way to create a guide is to select a spot on the rulers and then just double click it. Now, if your rulers are not showing, you might have this hide rulers checked. So if you go back into view, you can click show rulers or Command R, and you should be able to see them. Okay, now we already converted everything to inches when we set up the document, so these should be in inches, and I'm just going to select something close to 2 inches, and you can, with your selection tool, select that and see exactly on the x-axis where it's housed. Now I was going for 2 inches, not bad, pretty close, but I'm just going to type in a 2 and hit enter. Now that's going to be housed on the 2-inch mark, okay? Now I'm going to jump over here and I want one, let's say, on the 10-inch mark. Click it, it's a little off, I can type in 10 inches, boom. What I tend to do, and what I recommend when creating guides, is to do it in a way that is reflective. So I had to figure out a little bit of math when I was doing this, but this particular guide, I'll select it so you can see, or let me go into the master spreads. That guide is in the exact same spot as that guide if you measure the pages as if they were 2 separate pages. So this line, this black line going down the middle, is marking the beginning of the second 8.5 by 11 page. Okay, so the horizontal guides are going to automatically go across the entire width of the spread. So you don't have to worry about matching the left side up with the right side. You only have to worry about that with your vertical guides. So basically you just want to make sure that they're in the exact same spot. So if I have 1 at 2 and 1 at 4, and I do the math in my head, if this page begins at 8.5, because a normal sized piece of paper is 8.5 by 11 inches, then I would have to add 2 inches to 8.5, which would be 10.5. So I can pop another one in there, make sure it's perfectly on 10.5, and then 8.5 plus 4 inches, pop that in there, very close. 12.5. Okay, now those are basically exact left-right replicas of each other. So that's what you want to do when you're making these guides, because even though the content can change from left to right, like how we were doing these, the left-hand side looks a little different than the right-hand side, the guides are exactly the same, and that's what you want, that consistency throughout a publication. Granted, we're only doing a single spread, and we're talking about this as if it's part of an entire magazine, but it's good to be thinking through a project with the ramifications of what it would actually look like in a real world setting. Okay, so good. Once you get your guide system down, then you can begin to flesh it out with some content. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump over here to my master spreads from my actual magazine that I made. I'm going to copy everything except my page numbers. I'm just going to copy those guides, delete all of these. Oops. I'm just going to paste in place so that I know they're in the exact same spots. So you can copy and paste guides, obviously, I just did. And I just have all of the guides now in this tutorial exercise that I actually created in my magazine design. And so when I go down here to my actual document, there they are. Okay, so another thing that you're going to need to do is to create a paragraph style. First, you need a paragraph or some sort of text attribute. So I'm going to write, it's a little hard to see what I'm typing, scroll in, paragraph. This paragraph is newsworthy. Let's change the word paragraph to headline, because this is going to be my headline, a hypothetical headline. Okay, I'm going to make it in Helvetica, bold. That's the font that I'm going to use. Helvetica is a really great font. They've made books about it. They've made documentaries about it. It's also a super easy font to choose. Some people call it a lazy designer font, but for the purposes of this tutorial, it will work just fine. I'm going to place this right there, following my grid system, just lining it up with it, and I want my headline to be a little bit bigger because it's a headline, so it needs to be eye-catching. And it's also going to be almost lined up with that other guide, which is really handy. So, a paragraph style. We haven't talked about this before. You can have character styles and paragraph styles, and I want to jump over to my paragraph window. And remember, it's a window, so if yours isn't open, you can always go into your windows and scroll down. It's a type window because we're dealing with type, and you can click it. Mine's already checked because it's already open, but you can click paragraph and it'll show. So here's paragraph. There is another window, types and tables. Paragraph styles. Okay. Now I can see my paragraph styles right next to my paragraph, and you can always pop windows that you open and they'll automatically attach to whatever you have open. I want to have my paragraph open, and I want to have my paragraph styles open so that I can see everything at the same time. First, you want to make sure that the paragraph or the text box that you want to create a paragraph style out of is selected. What a paragraph style does is it takes the attributes of this text box and it creates rules about them. So if this is in the font of Helvetica, if it's 34 points in size, if the leading is 40.8 points and it's in bold, all of that is going to be taken into account if I make a paragraph style out of this. So again, the text box is selected, and I'm going to click this little post-it note. Anytime you see that in any window in InDesign, it means new. And because we're in the paragraph styles window, it means create a new paragraph style. So I create a new style, and it's called basic paragraph. Oops. It's called paragraph style 1. And I'm going to change the name of it to headline so that I know that that is the paragraph style for it. Okay, now the headline is only going to be used once, so we wouldn't actually need a paragraph style for that. But now you know how to do it. We're going to do it again just so that you have some practice with it. And I need to insert some body copy. Now, your body copy is obviously going to be whatever the text is from your news article. I'm just going to put in some filler type. And this is important for you as well. If you end up grabbing a news article that doesn't really easily fill the space of your magazine spread, you can fill some text boxes with some filler type to make it appear that the article is longer. What you do to get filler type is open your type window, scroll all the way down, and say fill with placeholder text. This is a language called Lorem Ipsum. It's basically a made-up language. It's never spoken by anyone. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a bunch of letters that are made to look like words. You'll probably run into a lot of geeky graphic designer jokes that involve Lorem Ipsum at some point. I'm going to select all, and I'm going to change the actual typeface to it's another good default font. I'll just say Times New Roman. Very default. I'll say Times Regular. Okay. It's in 12 points. 12 points is a little big. Something around 10, 9 would be better. While I've got us talking about the body copy text, I've developed some really good resources, or a curation of resources with the handouts for you on this, but it's going to be important that you make your text, or you lay out your text in a way that is going to be very legible. One of the goals for this exercise has to do with the legibility of text, and the handouts really talk about how to make text more or less legible. It depends on the font that you choose, it depends on the size that you make that font, and it also depends on the leading. Now, the leading is basically just the space between the lines of type. And the word leading actually goes back to when people used to set type by hand. The little strips of metal that they would put in between those long lines of type were pieces of lead, strips of lead. So that's why it's called leading to this day. So to change leading in InDesign, you go up here to this little area of your menu that has the space, the arrow showing between the two A's, and you can go up and you can go down. And you can also manually input a number. But it talks about very specific percentages compared to the points of the font, the size of the font, that make it more or less legible. But you need to make some design decisions about that when you're laying out your type. Okay, let's switch back to the mode. It's just really annoying to have all of that red type, but that's okay, we'll deal. Another thing that I would recommend in terms of newspaper or news article design layout is that you think about the alignment. Sometimes what's called a left justification alignment of your text, which is something that we dealt with in exercise 1, sometimes that can be done. Other times people will use completely justified and just have the very last line of it be aligned to the left. So what we're looking at right now is left alignment with a right rag. This very sort of jolty look to the text box on the right, that's what's called a rag. So it's left aligned, right rag. And if I select everything, you can also do this. And that's pretty typical for newspapers, but sometimes if it's a news article, it'll also do that as well. Now, something that happens pretty often when you decide to justify your type in this way is that you'll end up with a lot of hyphens in your paragraphs. If you want to know the correct rules for hyphenation, you shouldn't have more than one hyphen in one paragraph. And as you can see, this created a bunch of hyphens right in a row. So what I would want to do if I wanted to get rid of those hyphens is to make sure that everything's selected and then unclick the hyphenate button. Now, unclicking the hyphenate button fills the space with more spaces between the words. I'm just going to undo that so you can see everything's a little more condensed this way. It's filling the space better, but then when I redo those text attributes of taking the hyphens off, the spacing between the words gets a little bigger. And you can see it pretty easily when it's all selected like this. These spaces kind of create a line that this negative space becomes more obvious and more visible, and it's usually a little bit meandering. These spaces are called rivers, and you can avoid them sometimes by changing the length of your text box. So if I make it bigger, everything gets a little more condensed again, but if I make it very small, those rivers get huge. So that's another thing to consider, just some design attributes, and you can take all of that into account when you're making your guides. A text box that's a little wider will have fewer rivers, which is a better decision in terms of design. But you also have to be practical with the amount of content that you've got. Maybe you need to have columns that are that size in order to fit everything into your magazine spread. Okay, so back to what we were doing. We were creating another paragraph style based on the body copy. So the text box is selected, hit create new style, basic paragraph, paragraph style 1, and I'm going to change the title of this to body copy. Enter. Now, let me show you the delicious joys of paragraph styles. If I make another text box and I fill it with placeholder text, notice that it's in Minion Pro at 12 points, okay? But this one is at times 10 points. I can, with my selection tool, select that text box, select body copy, and in one click, the text attributes are fixed to times 10 point. That is wonderful. So now I fulfilled the requirement to have 2 paragraph styles. So that's another thing that you have to do. Something that is another really great thing when dealing with long bodies of text, like a news article, is this idea of joined paragraphs. So imagine that I have an article that is really long. In order to show you that, I'm going to make a really big text box that just covers the entire page. I'm going to fill with placeholder text. I'm going to make sure that it looks like my body copy. And now, if I shrink that text box down, there is a little red plus arrow to show that there's more text than this text box will hold, and that text box is not showing. It will also give me an error right here. And if I click that arrow, it gives me this little window that opens up. I can hit pre-flight panel, and it will tell me exactly what the error is. In this case, it's going to say that the text is overset, and it'll show me exactly which text frame it is. And this is InDesign giving you a warning that you have something that you are not showing that maybe you think you're showing. So there's more text there, and we're not seeing it because your text frame is too small. So that's a little helpful hint from InDesign. You can have errors for other reasons, but that's very common. Okay, so if that is what I've got, and I want to carry I can't see, what's actually this text box, the information of the paragraph that goes beyond the realms of this text box. If I want to carry that into a new text box, I can click on that plus sign and then click elsewhere. Or I can create my text frame ahead of time, and I want it to be a very exact size. So that's what I'm going to do. I have my text frame ready, okay? Clicking on the text frame that has too much text, clicking that plus arrow, and then clicking where that text box is that I just created, and it's going to funnel that information straight into this text box, okay? So now this text box on the right is joined with this text box on the left. The beauty of this is that you can change the size of your text boxes, and the content is going to automatically fit to the size of the text box. So if I did this manually and I ended the text here, and then I started the text up again in this text box, and then I decided later on, oh, I actually want this content to go all the way down to this line, then I'd have to take this text manually, take it out, put it in here, and it would be a huge pain, okay? So if I just pull that text box down, it's automatically going to include all that, and it's still linked to this text box and continuing on. Now notice that because these paragraphs or these text boxes are joined, when I click on this one, it no longer has a plus arrow at the end, it has a little blue play symbol, if you will, and that's just letting me know it's going to another text box. Now this one still has a red plus because there's even more text that's not showing. And I'd have to pull it down even more. Still not everything. Make it bigger. There we go. Now all the text is showing, and it's funneling from this paragraph to this paragraph. And that's something that you can do across pages. So if I wanted to start all of this text in this left paragraph, I could select all the text, Command A, Command X, taking it out, Command V, putting it in this text box. There's my red plus. Grab that text, put it in here. And it's going to automatically place it. And I didn't put it in the right spot. There we go. Now it's funneling into this one, and because we already connected those text boxes earlier, this second text box is funneling into the third. It's just a very easy way to manipulate your text so that as you make design decisions going forward, you don't have to think about the logistics of the text. Very, very handy. Okay, we talked about leading. Kerning is another fancy term for the spacing between letters. Now, I don't expect you guys to become professionals with kerning. Kerning is important because fonts don't always take the spacing of letters into account, but depending on the shape of the letter, it might come closer to the letter next to it or farther away from the letter next to it, and fonts can't always take into account every single combination of letters that are going to be next to each other. So it goes with this very general median that creates some results that aren't always necessarily optimal. To give you an example, you can see how close this R is to this T. It's just butting right up next to it. Whereas the space between the R and the O is a little bit farther apart. And it's using, again, that sort of default medium that is built into the font. A good way to fix that without having to be a professional is to select all of that type and go up here to the kerning menu. It looks like this little VA with a slash in between the V and the A, and generally it's automatically set to metrics. If you click on the drop-down menu, you'll see a whole bunch of numbers, and that means that you can manually change the kerning between the letters, but optical is what you want to select. Optical is going to shift the letters so that they look a little bit better. The R came closer to the O. It still has about the same space between the T, but everything is better for the eye. That's why it's called optical. And if something is really wrong with the font, you could always go in and manually change it, but I'm not asking you to do that, only if you really think that that's necessary. Now, another thing that you need to do is to create a drop cap. In my example, if we scroll back to that, a drop cap you're very familiar with. You may not know what it's called, but this little A at the beginning of the paragraph, that's called a drop cap. It's a capital letter and it's dropping into the paragraph. That's how it gets its name. So you only need one, and I only want you to do this at the very beginning of the article. So just select that letter, go into your paragraph menu, and then if you hover over this little part at the bottom, this little bottom left-hand corner of the paragraph menu, it'll say drop cap number of lines. What that means is that you're telling it how many lines you want that drop cap to fill. So right now it says 0 because that's the default. If I up it to 1, nothing's going to change because you're telling the drop cap only fill 1 line of text, which means it's going to look like a letter in a line of text. But as soon as you click 2, it's going to be filling 2 lines of text, and 3 and 4, etc. 3 is a bit much, I think. I'm going to pull mine right back down to 2, but that depends on how you lay out your type and what it's going to look like. You'll notice that it's pretty slammed against the rest of the body copy. In this case, Soloris is a word in this fake language, but in my other example, it says a doctor, teenager, and another man, so it needed a little more space from the next word so that it could stand alone. But say you need that kind of space, you can select that S, and speaking of kerning, you're basically just going to increase the kerning between that letter and the lines of type, and it's just dealing with the space in between that letter and what's coming after it. Okay, so that's how you create that sort of space. Now, another thing that you're going to need to know how to do with this magazine layout is to insert pictures. Now, I pulled these pictures directly from my news website, which was CNN in this case. And depending on the website you choose, the pictures may or may not be really high quality. This one is a little pixelated. This came from a news organization that was over in Sudan, and it was probably the only picture that CNN could get because they weren't actually there, but they still wanted to report. Whatever quality your images have, if it's part of the news article, I recommend that you use them. If you need more images or you want more images in your news article, just make sure that the imagery is actually relevant to what the news article is talking about. We don't want to see pretty pink ponies in an article about Sudan. All right, so the way that you need to place an image, there's a couple different ways you can do it. First way you could go about it is just to hit File, Place, and then that's going to open up a window of documents on your computer, and you can navigate around and pick a picture and then hit Enter and it'll place an image. Okay, another way you can do it is to create a rectangular frame tool, which we are well familiar with the rectangular frame tool by now, and while it is selected, do the same thing, hit File, Place, and then it's going to place an image into that square. Now, if you were to just say File, Place without a rectangular frame tool, it's automatically going to put it in a rectangular frame tool. But the rectangular frame tool might be really, really big if the image is really big, and then you have to size it down, and it might be kind of annoying. Another thing you can do is just copy an image straight from a website and then paste it into a rectangular frame tool. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new window in Google Chrome. I'm going to go to CNN. And CNN is a good website to choose if you need the news article. I mean, there are lots of great news article platforms. I'm not recommending CNN above another, but for the purposes of this exercise, CNN is free. So you can go on and select any article that you want, whereas a platform such as the New York Times will require you to pay. Time Magazine, I believe, does the same thing. So I'm going to type in Sudan. There's the article that I grabbed from January 18th. And there's the image. If you right click on the image, copy image, and then you jump back over to InDesign, if you right click on that rectangular frame tool and paste into, as you did in the former exercise, the image is going to be contained in that rectangular frame tool. Now, the benefit of copying and pasting an image into a frame tool in InDesign rather than placing an image is that the image becomes embedded into the document, basically. Whereas if I were to jump right back and save this image onto my desktop, image, and then I go back to InDesign, and I create a rectangular frame tool, and I say File, Place, Desktop, Image, Open. It's going to be in there. You know how to resize it already from exercise 1. This image is linked. See this little paperclip looking, cloud looking symbol right here on this frame? That means that what's in that frame is linked to another document on your computer, which in this case is the quote unquote image that's on my desktop. This rectangular frame tool doesn't have that link. So the benefit of not having a linked image is that you can close the document, move the document around, and never be concerned with connecting that other file, that image file, to this document. Whereas if I left my document like this, and I used the one that had the linked image, and then I went about my day, and let's say I deleted that image from my desktop, let's just go ahead and do that. So if I delete that image from my desktop, which I just did, that link symbol is going to become a stop sign with a question mark. Okay, and there's also going to be an error, link, missing link, and it's telling me this image that it was pulling essentially from the desktop is no longer there. So it can't pull it and it doesn't know where it is. That's the downside of placing an image into a document versus just copying and pasting, because then the image is automatically embedded, if you will, into that rectangular frame tool. So that's what I recommend, just copying and pasting and going about it that way. Okay, so you have already learned how to do facing pages, grid systems and guides, page numbers, paragraph styles, joined paragraphs, leading, kerning, drop caps, and image placement. I also mentioned in the prompt that you need to have everything that is outlined in the magazine elements that are introduced in the magazine design handout. So if I open the magazine design handout right here, these are all the elements that I'm talking about, okay? And I've outlined them according to the example so that you know exactly what I am referring to. Headline, you know what that is. The image caption. If there is no caption for your image, write what you see is happening in the image, but if you're getting this from a good newsworthy source, it should come with a caption. Subheads are not always in every article. My article didn't have subheads, so I had to read what was going on in the article and put them in. Basically, it's just outlining what's coming in the text, so that if someone were reading this really quickly, they could say, oh, deaths increase in Sudan, and maybe they weren't interested in the introduction, they just wanted to read about the government reaction. So they skip over here and they start reading. That's the point of a subhead. The gutter is a fancy word for the space that's in between the text columns. And that is going to be decided by the guides and the rules that you create for them and the space that's in between them. In this case, let me just shrink this down to show you. I would probably put another text box right next to this one, and this space in between would be called my gutter. Essentially, you just don't want to create a grid system where your text boxes are right next to each other because it's going to look like it's one line of type. Pretty self-explanatory, pretty much common sense, but make sure that you have a gutter. Okay, a running head is basically telling you where you are in the magazine. So in this case, it says CNN World. So if CNN had a magazine, maybe they do, I would know that I was in the World section of the CNN magazine. Whereas down here at the bottom, it just says CNN Magazine, and that just reminds me what the publication is. The folio also includes the page number. It can include some other things. Everyone does that a little bit differently. I just used the news source and said magazine. You need the date of the article, which will be included wherever you find it on your news source. The body copy is the main text for the article itself. The credits are the credits for whoever took the photo. That's usually listed. Mine was Al Jazeera or something that I couldn't pronounce, so I inputted a very plain Jim Glenn name for it. Okay, end marks are something that you will see very commonly if you pick up a magazine in Barnes & Noble or at the grocery store. It's just signaling the reader, this is the end of the article. You don't need to flip the page to read more. That's the end. The intro kicker is a sentence that is explaining a little bit more what the headline is about. So, deaths increase in Sudan. What deaths? A doctor and a teenager were killed in Sudan during anti-government protests. That's giving you a little bit more information, satisfying the reader's curiosity a little bit about what the headline is actually talking about. A pull quote, you should pull this quote, that's how it gets its name, pull this quote directly from the body copy of the article. It's a summary quote in a sense of whatever the tone is of the article. So this is someone within the article that's being quoted saying that violence won't help Sudan overcome its many problems, that these increased deaths are not a good thing, obviously, that violence is not good for the area, and that it's not basically helping Sudan move forward. Okay, the byline is a fancy word for who the article is written by. So in this case, it's written by a bunch of people, and then at the very end, sometimes the news article will say that other people also contributed. I included that information. You don't have to, but that's like a little PS of the byline, but it usually goes at the very end of the article. You have a drop cap. That's a stylistic decision, so it's not necessarily an element of magazine design, but it's something that I want you guys to include in your exercises. Okay, but all of these things are elements that you do need to include in your final solution. I mentioned that graphics is not included in the example, and you likely will not find an article that has graphics, so I'm not expecting you to include them. Graphics are usually charts and graphs. If there's an article with a lot of data, something like a political election, and they were trying to show what part of the country voted which way, there would probably be a graphic involved, but we're not going to be dealing with graphics at this time. Okay, so that is how you need to create your exercise 2. Just looking over at the exercise 2 overview sheet, there are also some constraints that I mentioned that aren't necessarily addressed in the handouts about magazine design or typography or grid theory, and I mentioned that you should not use more than 5 type sizes. In the example that I show, we have, I think, exactly 5 type sizes, and that takes the magazine design elements into account. You need a typeface that is the biggest for your headline. You need something slightly smaller for your pull quote. You need 2 different types of type generally. It's very traditional to have what's called a serif type in your body copy and a sans serif type for your headline. The serif, if you're not familiar with the term, serif is basically just these fancy little tails that are at the end of the letters. This is a sans serif type because there are no fancy tails. This is a serif type because there are fancy tails. And there are also fonts that are called slab serif, which have tails, but they are basically blunt. And this other font that I use in my course documents a lot would be considered a slab serif. And if you're picking fonts for your article, you can always go up here and just browse around. But if you wanted to select the filters, it will show you different classifications. So you can click just slab serifs if you wanted to find a slab serif, or just serifs, or just sans serifs. And that's a way to search for type, basically by style classification. So no more than 5 type sizes, no more than 3 fonts, no 2 fonts in the same style. So if you have a serif font for your body copy, don't also use a serif font for your headline. Don't have 2 serifs, don't have 2 slab serifs, don't have 2 sans serifs. Mix it up. So if I said have no more than 3 fonts, you could have a slab serif, a sans serif, and a serif. I only use 2 fonts. You really only need 2. The hierarchy of the information of a news article isn't just the type of font that you use. It's the style of the font, and by style I mean the particular member of what's called the type family. So this is Helvetica, and it comes in light, light oblique, regular oblique, bold, bold oblique. You know, if I were to treat this headline in light, it's going to feel and look very different than when I treat it in bold. Okay? And either could be a fine decision, but certainly bold is going to be a more eye-catching decision. But if I had it in light, but it was still significantly bigger than the rest of the type in my news article, it's still going to read as a headline. Okay, so all of those things need to be taken into account. I also mentioned no more than 2 design element colors. What do I mean by that? Design element colors. Well, I only use black. There's also obviously the photographs, and those can be in full color, and those are not what I would call design elements. This little line right here that's separating my headline information from my body copy, that's a design element. And if I wanted, I could change the color of that. Maybe I want that to be red, okay? And maybe up here in my CNN world, maybe I wanted to draw more attention to that. So maybe I would make a little box. It's in red. It's in front of my text, so I need to arrange it and send it to the back. Okay, black on red's a little hard to read, so switch it to white text. Boom, I have another red design element. Okay, CNN's logo is red, so that might make sense. Okay, so that's another thing that I could do. Then I would have black and red. That's 2 colors for design elements. All right, no more than 2. And then I say also no widows or orphans. What's a widow and an orphan? A widow is a single line of type at the very end of a paragraph. So there it is. There's a great example. Mr. Fugitator, however you say that fake word, that's an orphan right there, okay? It means that there's one little word hanging at the end of a paragraph. And the reason that this is a design no-no is because it draws attention to itself. It doesn't feel balanced. It creates a lot of negative space around it that's just distracting and not helpful at all. Okay, so that's an orphan. If we're going to talk about a widow, I don't have any examples of it here, but I can create one real quick for you. A single line of type that is just hanging by itself before a new paragraph starts. Blah, blah, blah. As soon as the text goes on. You don't want to have one little word that is from a previous paragraph that's just hanging by itself at the very beginning of a paragraph. So not at the end, not at the beginning. Those are widows and orphans. We don't want anything about them. Okay. Another thing, when you're done with your document, you're going to package it just like you did with the first one. I'm going to take this through you again just so that you remember how it's done. You need to go File, Package, okay? Summary, it's got the fonts automatically included. This is really important because you might use some fonts that I don't have on my computer. And if I don't have them on my computer, then when I open up your document, it might look like trash, and you might have designed it so that it looks amazing, but I wouldn't know it because I don't have your fonts, all right? When you package a document, it automatically includes the fonts, it embeds them basically into the package so that whatever fonts you chose, when I open up your document, my computer is going to pull those fonts into the document and I'm going to see it exactly as you intended, okay? So I'm going to hit package. Publication must be saved. I will save it. Magazine folder 2. And I'm just going to make sure that the IDML is checked, the PDF print is checked, high quality print, select package. Again, this always comes up. You can select, don't show it again. I don't know why I leave it. It comforts me. And I'm going to package the document. Now, it just created a folder. The easiest way to email that folder to me is to just zip that folder up and shoot it in an email. A lot of you guys did that right, but I just wanted to mention that. And one other thing that could be helpful to you guys, everyone has their own preferences about how they create an InDesign. I prefer Essentials Classic. Your window might look like this, which is just Essentials. And that's fine. And that is the default, basically, for how InDesign puts together their the style of their workspace right now. I'm kind of old school because I've been using InDesign for a long time, and Essentials Classic is what it used to be. It has a whole lot more bells and whistles showing. Sometimes it freaks people out, and some people prefer Essentials for that reason. It just pares everything down a little bit. If you want to look at your screen the way that I look at it, go ahead and switch it over to Essentials Classic. Otherwise, you can use Essentials. Everything that we access up here in the menus is exactly the same. You can open windows in exactly the same way. Open the character window. And if you have your own preference of a workspace, say you really love accessing your character window, you can just drag your character window over here and place it. And even though you're still in the Essentials, your character window is always going to be there because you put it there. So you can just sort of make your own InDesign style space however you like to work. Figure out what makes you comfortable, figure out what doesn't freak you out, and whatever really helps you design more efficiently. And that's what I recommend you go with. Okay, so congratulations, you've just finished tutorial for exercise 2. Good job.